great pleasure to talk to you. It's going to be a slight change in tone. Have the first slide, please. No. Thank you. I was asked to talk about the crisis in obesity and diabetes, and you're all aware about that. And coming from the outside, I mean, obviously I'm a blood pressure expert, I suppose in salt, but not really. It's quite obvious to me that how does this work?
He's best off using the keyboard. I think he's pressing his finger on the keyboard.
It's quite clear to me that it's due to ultra-processed fast foods and soft drinks, and I'll go into some detail why I think that in a moment. What we're interested in public health is what are the major causes of death and disability and life-adjusted disability years, and what can we do about it? And one of the ways of looking at that is to look at the causes of death or the causes of disability, and they're very similar, as you probably know, and I won't go into different details now. I've got here causes of death, and by far the biggest cause of death in the world is blood pressure. It's gone up to 8 to 9 million now. Tobacco we're not talking about, there's other important causes of death. High cholesterol, may surprise you, is the third cause of death in the world. Then these are developing countries, ignore those. Look at low fruit and vegetables, very important in causing death. And then obesity, but of course obesity is catching up. And overlying this is type 2 diabetes, which of course increases the risk of blood pressure and cholesterol very greatly. So if you have diabetes and raised blood pressure, you're at much greater risk from that blood pressure. And also, type 2 diabetes, as you all know, is the commonest cause of blindness, the commonest cause for need for dialysis, and the commonest cause of amputation of the legs. So it's incredibly expensive to look after people who develop diabetes, and therefore it's a priority in public health to prevent the onset of type 2 diabetes. So we're facing a crisis, as you know, in obesity and type 2 diabetes. You only heard yesterday or the day before about the numbers of type 2 diabetes developing in the UK, and that is happening globally. Where the fast food and soft drink industry move in, up goes obesity, up goes type 2 diabetes. Sorry. No, we've gone. Yeah. Now this just illustrates the sort of problem. This is admittedly an American child and is having a Big Mac, large chips and Coca-Cola. That is in calories equivalent to 11 bananas, 14 apples or 18 oranges. Now we could all go out now. I didn't have breakfast, I was a bit late getting here, and I could quite easily go and have a Big Mac, large chips and Coca-Cola and then have the lunch, couldn't I? But I couldn't eat 18 oranges. I challenge any of you to eat 18 oranges. This is the problem. It's actually blindingly obvious why people are getting obese. It doesn't require much science to understand that. And also, this requires 2.5 hours of vigorous exercise to burn off. So you can see this child running for 2.5 hours, or for me to go out running after having a Big Mac and large chip. I haven't got the time. How can I possibly do it? Keep forgetting this. Now, these foods and soft drinks are available everywhere. You know that. Anytime you move, you see them. You go to a railway station, you're surrounded by them. Airports, you're surrounded. Everywhere you go, and they're brilliantly marketed and advertised, as you all know, particularly to children. And the pressure, particularly on the more socially deprived, to buy these foods is absolutely immense. And not only that, the portion sizes increase, as you know, and this is mainly portion sizes from the 1950s to now, and we're all aware of the huge increase in portion sizes that have occurred. And if you look, this is a slide from the United States, but if you look at obesity and diabetes over the last 140 years, you can see there's a gradual increase up to about 1980 in the States, and then when the fast food, soft drink industry really came in, up goes type 2 diabetes. And exactly the same graph we can plot for the United Kingdom. Now, who is responsible for this? Well, obviously the mantra of the food and drink industry, Food and Drink Federation, or British Retail Consortium, or the food industry. You've got a choice out there. You can choose more healthy foods. It's not up to us to do anything. We've got very healthy foods in the supermarket. But of course the public can't choose, and particularly the socially deprived, don't have any choice. They go and buy the cheapest foods. There's huge pressure to buy these fast foods, which are incredibly cheap, and huge pester power from their children to buy them and the soft drinks. Now, is the government responsible? Well, obviously the government plays an important role in carrying out a plan to prevent the food industry from selling all this rubbish to us. But in the end, the food industry is responsible, and if there's anyone here from the food industry, you are responsible for all the obesity and type 2 diabetes. It's quite clear. And you must reduce the salt, which I'm not talking about now, fat and sugar content of foods. Actually, I wanted to go back, can I go back? I missed out one slide, I just want to show you. Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to, sorry, the slides jumped, this is going back a bit, but these ultra fast foods and soft drinks are very high in salt, the foods, and that puts up your blood pressure, which is the biggest cause of death. Fat, of course, saturated fat particularly puts up cholesterol, maybe sugar as well, some debate about that. But there's no doubt that the huge amounts of sugar and fat in these products increase our calorie intake, cause obesity and diabetes. And the problem about these foods, they give you no feeling of fullness or satiation. You eat them, and I just showed you that Big Mac. And that is the problem, that these foods are stuffed with these ingredients that are very high in calories, very high in salt, and very high in fat that puts up cholesterol. And of course, here are some children's things in the UK. And if you've got all of the nutritionists together in the world and said, look, let's design a diet that's going to cause high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, and type 2 diabetes, that is actually what we're allowing the food industry to feed our children. That's what you see advertised outside the hours, but outside all these products on the internet. Why do we let the food industry do this, particularly to our children? It's a scandal. Sorry about this, not like that. Now, yeah, so the food industry is responsible. Now, when we set up our action group on sugar, we were asked, there was a huge amount of publicity, I'll show you something now. We were asked by Jeremy Hunt, the Secretary of State of Health, to produce a plan to prevent childhood obesity. And we've now done that. And I've summarised it here. I've made it more simple. There were 7 points in the plan, but this just summarised it here. We want to see all of these foods reformulated, like the same that's happened to salt, and I'll very briefly talk about this afternoon. There's been a 30% reduction in salt in all products across the board. We reckon you can get a 40% reduction in sugar, given a bit of time, slow reformulation, 15% reduction in fat. That, as I'll show you now, will reduce calorie intake by far more than 100 kilocalories. We want to see the stop marketing of unhealthy food and soft drinks across the board, right, to all children, all adults. These products must not be advertised. They're like cigarettes in that sense, and we ban cigarette advertising. We need to ban the advertising of these products. We need to reduce portion size and availability. And of course, what we're saying, and we're of course deliberately misunderstood by the food industry, is when you take the sugar out, you don't replace it unless you replace it with an unabsorbed fibre, or water, or air. And that will reduce the portion size, obviously, and the availability. We think that there will have to be a tax on sugar and maybe fat, particularly to decrease consumption. We all know that taxes on cigarettes, taxes on alcohol, every time they're put up, they reduce consumption. Huge amount of evidence for the benefits of taxing unhealthy things that we do, such as cigarettes, alcohol, sweetened soft drinks, and these fast, ultra-processed foods. And then the really important thing, and we see this with salt across the world, is where countries have an independent body of nutrition, independent from political control and outside the influence of big food, we get much more action. Now, we had that in the UK with the Food Standards Agency, and tragically for public health, Andrew Lansley removed nutrition from the Food Standards Agency back to Department of Health, caused absolute chaos. And if you want to know more about it, I'll discuss it later. I haven't got time to go into that. But very sad. We no longer have an independent agency running nutrition, the biggest cause of death in the UK and the world. A scandal. what is practical? Well, big food is very powerful. You've got to realise that. They're the biggest industry in the world, the biggest employer in the United States, the biggest employer in the UK. They have very strong ties and influence to government. If Coca-Cola or Pepsi-Cola wants to see David Cameron tomorrow, he'll be there, guaranteed. And there's a lot of similarities to tobacco. I'm not saying that big food is the same as tobacco, but in the way they try and influence. Look at the WHO report. You heard from Professor Mann about the absolute interference by Coca. I didn't mention it, but it was Coca-Cola that ran that campaign against the WHO report. And therefore, being practical about it, we're not going to see all of the things we want in our obesity plan overnight. And what we want to see is reformulation whilst legislation is enacted and an independent agency is set up again in the UK to properly do something about obesity and type 2 diabetes. We set up this action on sugar in January 2014. The idea was to get publicity about sugar, obesity, diabetes and caries, and to target soft drinks for immediate reformulation and pressurise the UK Department of Health, which still is responsible in some ways for nutrition, and Public Health England. I mean, it's a nightmare trying to deal with these two because we're never quite sure who's responsible, but so they must act. And of course, in any political system, you have to accept the reality of how to change things within that system. It's no point dreaming in some world that doesn't exist. So we have a difficult problem, but we have pressurised them by an immense amount of publicity. And you're all aware of it. Admittedly, we started on the crest of a wave, but I think we really hit a spot that's very sensitive. People are very interested in sugar, and it's gone on and on and on about how sugar is so bad for you. Now, the basis of our reduction of 40% in sugar is based here that added sugar, 62 grams a day, actually is a serious underestimate of sugar intake. It's 12.6% of energy intake on average in adults, and to get a 100 kilocalorie reduction, and this roughly fits in with what Alison showed you, 30-40, I don't know if Saki hadn't finished it for us, but 30 to 40% reduction, 100 kilo, I'm only joking, Alison, 30 to 40%, 100 kilocalorie reduction, which would mean that energy intake have to come down to 7 to 8%, so sugar intake have to come down to 7 to 8% of sugar, of energy intake, sorry. And this would prevent obesity, particularly in lower income households, because they eat far more sugar than you and I do. So actually the amounts would be much bigger, and the reformulation, of course, is targeted at the products that have the most sugar in, which tend to be exactly the ones the socially deprived eat. So you can see the very scientific basis behind why we want a 40% reduction in sugar added to food and soft drinks. And it's quite good that both the WHO, after we had put this out, and SACM have both agreed, okay, provisionally, I know Alison, but to 5%, but they're very unlikely to change those two. And that is good news in terms of the reformulation, because it gives us the green light to say the food industry and soft drink industry, you've got to do something. Now, in practical terms, what have we got to do? We've got to persuade Jeremy Hunt to take immediate action. And that's a difficult problem because we've got an election coming up, and we've only got a window of about 5 to 6 months to get him to do anything, and then everything closes down. We want, and anyone from the food industry who's been involved in salt reduction, we want the UK and the food industry to lead the world as they have for reducing salt. And in the end, there must be regulation and taxation of big food and sweetened soft drinks. We cannot get rid of the obesity and type 2 diabetes just by reformulation, but it will be a big start. Of course, you all know this is a map in very confusing colours, but the grey is the worst countries in the world. The green is the next, more or less the next one, England, Australia and New Zealand, and of course out here the Pacific Islands have the worst obesity in the world. But we're all facing this, and wherever you go, all over the world, you see the soft drink, fast food industry. In Egypt, we're trying to do something about salt, believe it or not. There are huge adverts jointly funded by Coca-Cola and McDonald's, working together to make the Egyptians fat and make money. So that's the reason why we're getting obese and getting type 2 diabetes. I've already been through that. And we cannot let the profits and self-interest of the fast food and soft drink industry overwhelm us, which they are at the moment. Nutrition is the major cause of death and disability, and we've got to do something about it. And in my view, we need to prepare for war on a global basis to stop the industry moving into developing countries. And if we prepare for war, hopefully they'll give way. But if they don't, then there will be a war. Thank you very much.